Okay, we're recording. Good to go.
Okay. Shalom Aleichem, everybody. So, say call us Kashus. Yeshkach to Yosef for being our new back-end man, our new host. Call us Kashus. Took a few minutes to get in. Okay, I'd like to today be focused on Sugya and Teshuvah. We referred to it a few times, but to actually get into it, and this will be probably the last the Sugyas before next week we start going into the actual post game. So we'll start with the Gemara over here is going through the whole general isser of Mechira of Mechiras Hamadaka to Kachavim. There are places you can't. The Mishnah and Yudalim Abayz talk about places you can or can't do that inside the isser of Lifnei Iver of Revia, that certain places are chashid on and Revia, some places are not. Based on that, whether you for sure can't lend your behemoth to them, can you sell it to them as well? A discussion on the Mishnah. So that we see an Indian of Lifnei Iver Legabe Revia. And then we have another issue over here. You can't sell it either to them, which the Gemara had a problem. What's the problem with selling it to them? Once it's theirs, it's theirs. So the Gemara said that we have an issue of that if you sell it to them, you might also come to lend it or rent it to them, your own behemoth, and then they'll use it on Shabbos, and you'll come to have your behemoth working on Shabbos. Our Musar and Shvis's behemoth on Shabbos. And another problem the Gemara came out with is that maybe he'll be even if you sell it to him, maybe he'll be trying it out first to see how well it works under a burden, and it'll happen on Shabbos. He's trying out the animal for the first time, and it just stands there, and you might end up calling it, and it recognizes your voice. It'll come, so then there'll be a sort of again, it's just well, there it's a problem of Machamer, which that's machlokas, whether it's skila or just a lav. So we're worried about those things. Then the Gemara goes on to say, in the bottom of Tesla of Maralef, so we'll get into the sugi we need to get into now. That he sold a para to a goy. The Mishnah says not to, because of the gzera of like we just mentioned, all those gzeras. You can't sell a part to a goy, to a over kachavim dafka. So why did you do this? Maybe it can be tola to say that with tola lakula that it was sold l'shchita, not to be working. So if the shchita, there's no problem with working on Shabbos, and all these gzeros won't apply. How do you know? Now here, the other side that the goy might use it for, he might use it also for avodah zarah. So that's another reason why I can't sell it to a goy. If he has a para, now you can use it for avodah zarah, which that would be not a problem. Your problem inside that it might be working on Shabbos, but then that's a problem of lifnei iver giving the goy a para for avodah zarah. That's a lifnei iver problem. So he says that, okay, maybe he's not going to use it for avodah zarah, he's going to use it for shchita. He's going to shecht it, need it. So the Gemara says, how do you know that you're allowed, if you have a suffix, if a shaila of lifnei iver, so how do you know you're allowed to say talinin? Who tells me I'm allowed to say that I have a shaila over here, mamish lifnei iver deraisa? I could just be tola and say, well, maybe he'll use it for something else. How do you know that can sort of take away the Lifnei Iver? So we bring a raya from a Mishnah in Shvis. Don't sell to a Jew that's chashud on Shvis. Don't sell to him a para that plows on Shvis. Basil matirim meshiyachol l'shofta. Basil says you could because mechatesi he's going to use it for plowing, and both in its usher, maybe he'll shecht it, even though it's a para hachareshes. It's able to be charesh. It's one that's usually used for charisha, But if he needs it for meat, so maybe he'll shecht it. So we see a riot from Beis Hillel that you're allowed to be tola when it comes to lifnei iver. If I would give him something and I know for sure he's going to use it for a charisha, then that's lifnei iver. I can't do that. What? I'm be somewhat on the fact that he's going to shecht it. So that's good for the machalos b'shan Beis Hillel. When passing like Beis Hillel, that's mutter. So we are allowed to be tola when it comes to lifnei iver. Amarabba mi dami. Hasan ein ona mitzuva shvis behemtoi b'shvis. Hacha ona mitzuva shvis behemtoi b'shvis. How can you be done with the two things that by Shabbos you're mitzvah and shvis behemtoi, and therefore we have a gzera over here. But by shvis, I'm not mitzvah that my behemoth shouldn't work on shvis. So therefore that's not a problem over there. The Gemara doesn't really address the ikar problem. The Gemara is talking about a side problem with shvis. It left out the ikar nakuda that we were discussing, which is lifnei iver. So we'll see how they're shown to address that question. The Gemara says, if you would be mitzvah, then it would be usher, and then I wouldn't stay at Shliya. If I'm mitzvah in that not happening, like let's say shus behemtoi or whatever, then any other thing that I'm mitzvah, and then there I could not be tola. What about your sada? That you are mitzvah, that your sada should rest on shvis. But Tanan Beishame Omer lo yukor adam sada near b'shvis besil matirim b'shiyachol havira. We see that Beis Hillel says that you're allowed to sell your field on shvis to somebody that even if it's a chashan on shvis, because yachol havira, he could leave it empty, he could leave it fallow and not plow it on shvis, even though you sold him a sada near which is already plowed. So, but since you're allowed to be tola, Beis Hillel says even there shiyachol havira could leave it. Then the Gemara goes on, so we're not going to go through the whole rest of the sugya inside right now. I want to go back to this main nakuda, that when the Gemara asked the first shaila, "Minat tamer damrina ki agavna mechatesi," Rashi says, "Minat tamer dehecha deikar lemitli b'mechira delifnei iver tolina lekula." How do you know? The kasha of the Gemara is minat tamer. How do you know that you could be tola when it comes to a shaila of nifira? If I put something in front of somebody and there's two tzadim, I'm allowed to be tola, he'll do the tzad heter, not the tzad isser, and that takes away the isser of lifnei iver. Where do you know that from? So that was the shaila of the Gemara. So the Gemara answered like we asked, a side answer. It answered that if you would siv on shvisis behemto b'shvius or not, we left out the main point. So the Gemara's answer left out, ikar chasam in a sefer. So Rashi tries to answer that by saying, since on shvis you're not mitzvah, your behemoth should rest. Therefore, if you sell it him a behemoth, a chareshes, we're not worried about shalav eschiris, which we were worried about before. That if you sell a behemoth to a goy for erev Shabbos, then maybe you'll end up also lending your behemoth to him, and your animal will work on Shabbos. Or nisyoni, he'll try nisayon, and you'll call it, and you'll be over the lav de machamer. So that doesn't apply over here. So Rashi imishum lifnei iver lositen michshol. What about that? That was the ikar shaila. So Rashi says talina b'shchita. We see from here you're allowed to be tola that he's not going to plow with it, but instead he'll shecht it. I mean, not going to plow with it. He won't bring it to Avodah Zorah. He'll just shecht it for himself. On Shabbos we have these other xeras of you might lend it to him or etc. So you might be over an Isser Shabbos. Therefore, we are gozer over there. But over here, when Shvius are not gozer, and in both cases, Rashi is saying whether it's Shabbos or it's Shvius, we're not gozer we're not gozer mishum lifnei iver, because in all these cases we're allowed to be told b'shchita. That he's not going to bring it to Avodah Zorah, he's just going to shecht it for himself and eat it. So, l'chora, it's a double pella, it's a pli atzuma, mamash a pella gadol, this whole sugya, that how could we say a swore of talina, and we have a shaila of an isser deraisa over here. Mamash an isser deraisa of lifnei iver, that if I give it to a goy, then it might bring it to Avodah Zorah, like we start off in the beginning of the parak, then in the beginning of the sugya, then I'm over the Iver Deraisa. So what I'm coming along and I say, well, Talina, I'll be Tola. There is a concept of Talina, and we find many places in halacha. For example, in Hilchos Ksamim, let's say if you have there's a number of cases that by Kesem, by Anisha, by Hilchos Nida. So let's say you have two women, and between them there's a Kesem. You find a Kesem between them. They're both sleeping in the same bed, and you find a Kesem between them on the sheet. So the halacha is that Talinan Kilko B'Mkukeles, that if one of them is a nida and one of them is not a nida, then we're allowed to be tola the kesem by the one who's already mekukelos, and not to be matane the other woman who's not. That's over there the sugya learns that out from the halacha that if we have, let's say, two kupos, you have a kupa of truma and a kupa of chulin, and you have you had another a box of chulin and a box of truma, and they fell into each other, and you're not sure which fell into which. We would say talinan, that the truma fell into the truma and the chulin fell into the chulin, rather than the other way around, and to create tevel or create a problem. We're allowed to be tola the kula. The Gemara says that, but the Gemara says on that Mishnah by truma that we only say that by truma d'Rabbanan. If it would be truma d'Oraisa, we can't say talina. We can't. It's fake d'Oraisa. You can't make it tzliya like that. Only by D'Rabbanans, that to begin with, the whole thing is D'Rabbanan. That's why we're told it. Who had been like Ksamim, we say that Ksamim, Iker Ksamim is only D'Rabbanan, right? Because D'Oraisa by Nida is only by Hargasha. So Ksamim, by definition, is without Hargasha. So the whole Ksamim is D'Rabbanan. So there we also say Talina. And there are common cases where we're told the Kula by Ksamim. Like if she has a Makkah, so then a Makkah anywhere, then we're tola b'makkah. We're told if you find a kesem, we're tola that the makkah came from, even though the underwear is right on bosa makkah, where it's maybe more mustaber that we're coming from bifnim, and it should be elsewhere, but we're tola b'makkah. So and the poskim will point out the only reason we can say these tliyas is because it's an isser d'Rabbanan. By deraises, we don't say we're not just tola for carrot. We say steak deraises l'chumra. So this whole sugya over here, l'chor, is a pella atzum, that we're just going to say talinan by in Isur Deraisa. So I found taka that the Ritva, some Ura the Shala, Baruch Hashem. We're not crazy. Might be crazy for other reasons, but not for that. Let's see. The Ritva says. The Ritva is actually asking on the continuation of the Gemara, the way we asked it, when the Gemara said, "Mi dami hasam eino mitzuva shvisas behemto v'shvis." So it's okay to do it because you're not mitzuva and shvisas behemto and shvis, therefore it's all right. So he really asked, like, so what about the main problem? Tamili milsa, my kamar adarabba neida hasam eino mitzuva shvisas behemto v'shvis. Fine, we're not mitzuva and shvisas behemto. What about lifnei iver? You forgot about the main problem. And iser lifnei iver is even more chamor than any charisas para b'shvis, which is not an iser begufo. Lifnei iver, you're over begufo. The gavra is over lifnei iver. It should be much more chamor than charisha b'shvis. So he answers the Gavala Chiddush. Tremendous chiddush for the whole sugya of lifnei iver. Mistabrali dehaka kamar dehasam kevin delika ela lav de lifnei iver ein lav de lifnei iver ela kashanosna lemisha yaseh bo avera vadai. Lifnei iver is only when you put it in front of somebody in a way that he's for sure going to be over that avera. He's over avera vadai. Rabbanan asru afilu stamo. The Rabbanan, they asked lifnei iver. They made a new isur lifnei iver Rabbanan, which we're seeing now for the first time. Such a concept in this ritva. We don't see it in before in the Gemaras anywhere, but he's mechadish over here that there's two dinner. There's a lifnei iver deraisa, lifnei iver midrabanan. Lifnei iver deraisa is when you put it in front of a person in a way that his vada going to be over. I'd say the most pasha case would be if you feed somebody isser in their mouth, so your mamish giving it to them, and we'll see that there's going to be a whole spectrum of possibilities in between that and what he's talking about over here. But he's saying that where it's not vada over, but there's a reglaim ledavar, and it makes sense that he would be over. So then deraisa it's not, because it's not vade over. But since it's a reglaim ledavar, the rabbanan asert it. So they're machadash lifnei ivrim mid rabbanan. When it's only the rabbanan, when you take away the deraisa, and it's only the rabbanan left, now we're donning whether you could be tola or not. So he's basically saying, like we said, that tol nekula dlav avera boile ukmi rabbanan adina ve'tira. So he's saying that basically what we're tying that how can you say tolinin by Nisa Deraisa, and he's saying Anachanami, it's not a Nisa Deraisa over here. Since it's not a Vade over, it's only that demotes it to a Derabanan. By Derabanan we can say tolinan. So it puts it right back into the realm of Ksamim and Truma Derabanan and everything else. They were allowed to be Tola Lakula. So that is a tremendous chiddush of the mitzvah. Now I think that it's pretty pashut that Rashi does not hold this way, because Rashi just keeps on talking about lifnei ivur. It didn't say it doesn't qualify it by, this is a tremendous chiddush. You can't just assume we're talking about lifnei ivur Rabbanan without ever saying it, and the Gemara didn't say it. And so Rashi just says the words lifnei ivur. Pashtus, he's considering this over here still lifnei ivur deraisa. So in other words, and we're saying talinan on it for some reason. We're saying the talinan is going to be the ritva is. See, it's interesting. The ritva is making this into a two-step process. First of all, it's not Vada is going to do it. Okay, so then that demotes it toward the Rabbanan. And now that we're not Vada doing it, it's the Rabbanan. Now we can say we're told that Taka won't do it. So the fact that he might not do it, that sort of, according to the Ritva, that inserts two steps into the process. Right? He might not, therefore it's the Rabbanan, and therefore it will be told that he won't. It's interesting that the same thing sort of turns it into a two-step process. Rashi, I think he had that shver. Rashi had that difficult to say such a thing, that where's the two steps over here? All we see is one step, really. It's just that we're told whether we told it or not. And even so, Rashi is saying Tolina. So I think the kasha we're asking, and the Ritva is trying to answer, Hadra Kushla Dufta and Rashi, that Sof Kol Sof, Rashi's learning this Deraisa, and he's saying Tolina. So how does that make sense? How do we understand that? So I want to say a chiddush. I was thinking, and these kind of things you're a little scared to say. You're saying a chiddush and a deraisa, just say it, without any raya. But Baruch Hashem, I found that there's a Shals and Shuvas Machane Chaim, one of the Chashuva Ungarisha poskim, was one of the Talmidim of the Chassam Sofer and the Yeshiva of the Chassam Sofer. So so Baruch Hashem found he says mamish the same words. So what I was thinking is that this Isser over here, the Soda Isser is Lifnei Iver Lositian Mikshal. You can't put a Mikshal in front of him, which there's much to say. We saw a discussion in the Rambam and the Chinuch in the first year of like, how is it an Iver? It has to be an Iver, but I think the second shlav is it has to also be a Mikshal. What you put in front of him has to be a Mikshal. Like the dugma is, even though we say that it's not really nichlal in the deraisa, but would be a blind guy is walking down the street, and you go and you put a chair in front of him, so he's for sure going to trip over it. So that it's clearly a mikshal. So Rashi's learning that if the thing you're putting in front of him is clearly a mikshal, then that it is. But if it's not, it could be he might use it for an isser, he might not. So it's up to him what he does with it. You're not giving him something that's vade and isser. You put it in front of him. He might not. So that Rashi learns that takes away, that itself takes away the deraisa, because it's not necessarily a mikshal. It might be, might not be. Whether it is or not, you didn't put in front of him a mikshal. If he uses it for an avera, it's up to him to do that. So he made it into a mikshal, not you. So that's a tremendous chiddush of Rashi to say that by deraisa that it needs to be a vadai iser in order for it to be lifnei iver. Or that's going to be fat in Rashi. The Ritva holds Nechatesi, who said it has to be a vadai to be like that. So he has to come in and be machadis that it's rabban, and only then do we say talinan, like I said before. But that's cool. I think the chiddush of Rashi that the talinan itself makes it into Durbanan. So the same Durbanan that takes that down. Now we're allowed to be told as well. It's really sort of the one big step. Now there seems to be a big problem with this pshat though. That Rashi, if you remember, Rashi and back in Vavam and Beis, seem to say exactly the opposite. There we had a Machlokas Rashi and Tosfos that Amr ben Nassan, Minayin shel Yoshet Adam Kos shel Yain LeNazir v'Ever Min Achai LeBnei Noach. There, the two classic examples were Kos Yain LeNazir and Ever Min Achai to Ben Noach. Tamalomar v'Lifnei Iver Lo Sitei Mikshol. Rashi said, Lo Yoshet Adam Kos Yain LeNazir Shema Yavo L'Shtoso. Maybe he'll come to drink it. So Rashi is saying that the Lifnei Iver applies by a Shema. It doesn't have to be a Vada, it's a Shema. Tosfos over there is Cholik. The Rush is mashal like Rashi, but Tosfos over there says, Nira Dehuadin B'chol Shari Surim. Tosfos is raising the question, like we spoken last year, that why do we pick Dafka those Averas, and because it applies to Kol Torah Kula. So Tosfos answers, Elahachi Nakat Kos Yain LeNazir should be Stama Lemishte Kaboiloi. It's the stama there to be drunk. What else do you do with the glass? A guy says, I'm thirsty, give me a glass of wine. So you give him a glass of wine, what else is he going to do with it? It's not going to, maybe he'll use it for Lazala Fagabli Ishin, you want to send Hedron. You know, maybe he'll pour it onto the Mizbeach or something like that. No, Stama the Mishtekoi. Normal person, what do you do with wine? You drink it. And he says a similar lesson later on in Tosfos, when he says by the mummer, the Vedas Kachavim, you can't give him a davar iser, even though it's his, ki a davar yadua shiachluhu. It's known, it's a davar yadua that he's going to eat it. So Tosfos over there is learning that in order to be lifnei iver, you need vadai. And Rashi over there says it's even by suffix. So the Chora, it's a steer in Rashi. If we're saying the pshat that we're saying Rashi is true, that Rashi by us is dafka saying you need vadai to be over, and that'll be the reason why we're talinan. We're able to be talinan. It's not a vadai. So, but I think the answer is going to be. I saw this somewhere. Maybe it was also in the. I'm going to be giving out in the next Libud. I'll print out this Machane Chaim and give it out because it's going to be very to get to a lot of shilas on my side. But could be I saw it there as well. That Rashi, to answer Rashi, that there's these two sugyas are very chaluk. Kos yain lenazir, that's it's a chefta shalisar for him. There's no two ways about it. There's no two ways to use the wine, right? Wine is if you're, there's no way to drink this wine that's going to be okay. It's a chefta d'isura. Every minachai to a goy or 10 to yet also, but to a goy even is also chefsa d'isura. There is no way to eat every minachai. You can't salt it. The rabbi can't bless it. There's nothing to do to it to make it kosher. So it's a chefta d'isura. So when the etzem thing you're putting in front of him, there's no two ways to look at it. It's mamish a chefsa d'isura. So that Rashi holds that it's also even when it's with shema, he might drink it. He might. The only thing he might not do, as far as the wine is concerned, is he might not drink it. There's no way to drink it, and it's going to be okay. So that Rashi, if he puts it in front of him, no one's forcing him to drink it. We don't know 100% if he's going to drink it, but what he put in front of him is a chefsa shel mikshol. It's etzam a mikshol. It's a chefsa shel avera. So you put the davar you put in front of him is mamish a davar shel mikshol. Whether he'll follow or not, and either walking down the street could also decide to stop and rest. You might not trip over your chair 2 steps later, but you put a mikshel in front of him. He keeps walking. You put a mikshel. You gave him this chefta shel avera. You put mamish a mikshel in front of him. Masha Enken, our sugya in Tesvav, that over there you gave him a para. So a para is not a chefsa shel iser. A para depends what you do with it. There's no chefsa shel iser called a para. A para could be shechted and eaten. It could be brought as what is It really depends what the person does with it. The para itself is parv until you shecht it. But so when the etzem chefsa shel davar is not a chefsa shel iser, it's not a mikshol be'etzem. It's not a chefsa shel mikshol. So that Rashi learns that in order to be over lifnei iver, it has to be a vadai that is going to do it. Because the vadois the vadois that he's going to use it, let's say for a avodah zarah, he's standing there. He's a korban avodah zarah, and he says, "Give me the para for the avodah zarah. I can't believe it. My para died. I need a good healthy para for this avodah zarah." And you go and you give it to him. So he's standing there. He's vadagging me over. So even though this etzem by b'fnei atzmai is not a chesed shel mikshol, but the fact that there's a vadois, he's going to use it for an avera. So then the vadois turns it into a mikshol. So you need a vadois mitzad the gavra for this to be lifnei iver, but masha'enken by the sugi and daflav, it's a mikshol b'chefza, and there Rashi holds us enough that it's even the suffix. I think that'll answer up the steer in Rashi. I saw something similar to this. Somebody showed this to me yesterday. I'm going to find it. Oh, here. I think it's in the new Shmir Shabbos Kilchasa. It's in Perek Kaftes Ha'ara Ayin Hey. B'Shem Rebbe B'Shlomo Zalman. They were talking about putting let's say you own a candy machine. You're going to put it, let's say you own a candy machine that's going to be in the JCC. The JCC is open on Shabbos, as it is here. I think a lot of them are. Okay, and so people are going to go putting quarters or whatever, or they're putting their credit card today, whatever, and to get a chocolate bar. So this is already an old shiloh, and I have a candy machine out in the street. Even with Ir Sheruba Nachri, there's a shiloh about having it's a Mekach Memkar on Shabbos or not. You're diving in shul, you're in the middle of Musaf, and a goy is coming in, putting a quarter in and getting out your. So that's the Marshag. We discussed this way back in Mir La'akum, holds that it's fine. It's mufka for many mice that you're doing. But what about if it's in a place of Yidden? What about Lifnei Iver on that? So in Shmir Shabbos, it's in Perek Kaftes, Sif Kaftes, in the top, where he talks about. He says, and it's in a place where Jews could use it, or Jews in a place like in the JCC or something. Make sure that you have to have it somehow turned off on Shabbos. If there's a chance of Mechalei Shabbos, are you going to use it? So he brings down here from Shlomo Zalman. He says that even though it's usher to put a mikshol in the street, even in a place that's rubam nachri, and like the av of that halacha is that it's usher to sell to a goy a beged that has shatnas in it. If you can't tell the shatnas, you're not allowed to sell that beged to a goy. If there's a chance he might turn around and sell it to a yid, and the yid is not going to know. It could be non-from or it could be unsuspecting because you can't tell that it's shatnas. And that's also even in the Ir Sheruba Nachrim, because I'll also that. So Rosh Zalman says, so here we said in the previous halacha, and that's the tshuva of the Marshag, that Ir Sheruba Akum, in a city that's Ruba Akum, you're allowed to keep your candy machine on. It's out in the mall or whatever, and it's Ruba Akum in that place. You're allowed to have it on even in Shabbos, even though some Jew might come by. But we go bust to the road. We consider it that we're not concerned about it. So why is that? So Shlomo Zalman was asking Akasha that he it's Makabal that halacha, it's Makabal that Marshag. So why is that different than the halacha mefereshes? You can't sell the beged she'abu b'klayim even Ir Sheruba Akum. So why don't we go after the rove also over there? Because maybe a Jew will sell it to a Jew. Also, maybe a Jew will buy from the candy machine. So he says, which is similar to the chiluk we said in Rashi, he says, Shiny Hasam Shabeged Atzma Hu Gufa Isser. By the Klayim, the beged is a chefsa shel Isser. That's the Gufa Isser. So you can't be responsible that a chefsa shel Isser should get to it through any means you caused, get to another Jew. Masha'enken in the Didan, Masha'enken in our case, Harizedome lepara chareshes b'shnis, the Kamalanka Beis Hillel. Masha'enken, the Didan in our case of a candy machine, that's more similar to the para chareshes. in our sugya, the para chareshes, that if there's no problem with shvis, then we're not worried about lifnei iver either. Shemut for them korli Yehudi chashud, even though the Jews chashud mishum time of the ikal mitli. So we say this for the ikal mitli. Maybe he won't use it for that. We're allowed to be talinan. So his mom is saying our chiluk that we're saying between the Shiur and Rashi. He's saying as a chiluk between our sugya and the other sugya of Abed Baklayim, that there we don't say talinan, because over there it's talking about chefter shaliser. By that we don't say talinan because when it's a chefter shaliser, it's lifnei iver mamish even besafek. Mashenkin by us, when there's a safek, it's not a chefter shaliser, then you're not really putting on, like we're saying, you didn't say these words, but you're not putting a real mixel b'fun of. It's talinan what he does, and on that we can say talinan. The Fizeh goes on to say, Chiddush, Nira de Nido de Dun, in the case of the candy machine, Nikar Adin Mutter Gam Ima Mishtamshin B'mitkan Hem Yehudim. Even as Jews that are mainly going to use it, it really shouldn't be Lifnei Iver Betzin. Kiyash Litlois Shaloy Shtamshu B'mitkan Me'el Shabbos Kodesh. Lifnei V'achrei Shabbos. You can be told if you have a machine there, maybe they'll buy candy right before Shabbos, right after Shabbos. Maybe they won't buy on Shabbos. You could say Talinan, like we say in our sugya. Even that's mutter, even if it's your candy machine, we got ein lesser machine schar Shabbos. Taking it back to our old sugya, it's also not considered schar Shabbos because nobody worked on Shabbos to get that. Because the money is going for the people are paying the money not to pay a worker. They're just paying for the object that they're buying. They're paying for the item that they're buying. So that's what he holds Meikar Adin. Other Achronim say you should be machmir. It's not nice, whatever. So, but Meikar Adin, Rosh Hashanah is telling us a tremendous chiddush, which is really built on everything we're saying in the sugya, that there's a difference in lifnei iver between chefster shaliser to something which is could go this way or that way, and it really depends what the person does. On that we say talina, and that there's no lifnei iver.
Rabbi,
That's very geschmack. And now I'll just throw out a question without an answer right now, and we'll talk about this next time. Based on this, everything we're saying, just a little food for thought, no pun intended, that if you give somebody the shaila in halacha, you're not allowed to give somebody food if they're not going to make a bracha, and that's an isser lifnei iver, then which type of aver is that? Is that chefzer shalisser, or is that something which we could say talinan on? I'll just throw it out as a question. Just not looking for answers now. Just because there's no way to eat this food without a bracha, right? Or maybe there is a way if somebody's a chola and they can't talk, whatever. But al kapanim, is this called chefter yisura, and therefore you can't be tola on anything, or is it really be'etzem something which depends on the person and it's not really chefter shalisur? You could say it's chesed shalisur because the Gemara says that the Gemara in Brachos says that asur lehenus me'elam hazeh b'la bracha, and the Gemara compares it to and there's the Yerushalmi and the Gemara in Brachos over there, and the Yerushalmi also gets Mavarchim, compares it to Kachim, and compares it to Mila. If you're nene b'la bracha, you're like mal b'kachim Shemayim, kachim Hashem. You're not allowed to be nene from kachim without until you actually makriv the korban. Once you makriv it, then it's mutter. Then the kohanim are supposed to eat it, or the baalim can eat it if it's shlamim. But until that point, until the zrikas dam, then it's Mila. And the Gemara is comparing eating without a bracha to Mila, to like eating a shlamim before shkita. So does that mean to say that it's a chefsa shalisar, or is it something else? Is it so? Well, I'll just leave it out, and hopefully we'll talk about it next time. But I think it depends very much on the sugya, and we'll see. It's not the Machan HaChaim. The Machan HaChaim very much ties that this shaila into what we're talking about in the sugya here. So I just want to go on before it's too late to go on to a little further in the sugya. One other point I want to talk about here is the Tosis. The Gemara goes back and forth in this whole shaila about the mechira and to selling a para to a chashud on shvis, and then we go on and we compare that to also selling certain kalim that are going to be used for a field. That's for sure. That's clearly there's no other use for them except for maybe the field you want to buy because if it's for sale in Shvis, not necessarily to plow it. Maybe fields aren't always available when you want them, so maybe you want to just buy it now when you can. Or even the a para sometimes is not always available either. You might want to buy it now and then just use it and keep it around, not plow with it. But the kalim that are for plowing, obviously you want them for plowing. You can always get them if you want them. You want to plow now. That sure also, and we go and compare that to kalim of war as well. People might murder with them. There's also lifnei iver. So the maskana of the Gemara. Where are we? Back wrong sugya. I'm looking at the wrong page. So Tosas divrei maskal le'obed kachavim mazvin le Yisrael lamazvin le. Okay, Tosas says here maskana. We had a whole mice over here with. I assume everybody saw the sugya. That Rabbah sold a chamor to Israel that's chashud to sell it to a goy, which he's not allowed to sell that to the goy because of those reasons that we said of the reasons that he might use on Shabbos, or if he sells it to him, he might lend it to him, maybe Chal Shabbos with his animal. So there was a whole back and forth between Abaya and Rabbah. Abaya said, "Why'd you do that?" And he said Terutzim, and he slugged up his Terutzim, and then Rabbah ran after him to try to stop him and buy it back, and it ran very far, like miles to get him. He couldn't catch him. So Tosa says that Maskana Maskinan also Mizvan the Yisrael Chashid. The halacha would come out that you're not allowed to sell a chamor, a para, to a Yisrael that's chashud to sell it to a goy in a way that it's usher to sell it to him, which in any case that we usher. So you can't sell it to a Yisrael chashud because he might turn around and sell it to the goy in a way that it's usher. Ask Tosas in Taimar, Ma'ishtam b'lifnei delifnei deliel. We actually mentioned this Tosas before when we talked about the Sugya Yadala last time. Now we'll go into it a little bit more deeply. Tosas asked that why is this different than lifnei delifnei? The Gemara said previously in Daf Yadalet that over there we talked about selling the incense to a guy, to an Obed Avodah Zarah, that you can't do that because it's lifnei iver to give him incense to makriv to the Avodah Zarah. But if you sell him a whole commercial package of the incense, which obviously is not going to take that whole thing, there's enough there for 500 goyim to do their Avodah Zarah. So that you're allowed to sell him because he's for sure not going to be makriv it. Effect the Gemara, he's going to sell it to another goy that's going to be makriv it. So then why is that okay? So the Gemara answered that the Torah only asked us lifnei iver, but not lifnei de lifnei. That's what the Gemara said. So you could clarify what's the reason for that? What's the difference between lifnei and lifnei de lifnei? There's what to talk about with that. But the Tosas is asking in the kasha over here that why can I not sell the Yisrael HaChashud? Why can I not sell him something he might sell it to a goy in a way that's usher? That's selling to a goy, that's one removed. So that's lifnei de lifnei. Tosas answers in a very important answer. Yesh lamar dehasa mayri ba'od kachavim she'enu musar lifnei iver. Fikach ain't anu chashishim im ba'od kachavim yukor lechaberoi. Over there in Daf Yudalad, the reason we said it's mutar is because the goy that you sell the package of incense to, the big commercial package to, the goy is not mitzvah in lifnei iver for Avodah Zarah. His mitzvah, one of the zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach is Avodah Zarah, granted, but there's no zayin mitzvahs b'nei Noach of lifnei iver. So the goy is not mitzvah in that. So for you to sell it to him, because he might sell it to another goy, that's not your problem. That's lifnei to lifnei, because you're not selling it to a person that you're being machshel him in anything. It's not a mixel for him to sell it to the second goy. You're not causing a mixel. Aval hacha demayri b'Yisrael achashud Anu is harm shelo yavo shum Yisrael l'dei takala al yadenu. Harab Rabbi Elchanan says in the name of Rabbeinu Elchanan that. So we already had Rabbi Elchanan, was already saying Chiddushim that far back. Anyway, so he says that we're muzhar here in our case. It's not a goy to a goy; it's a Yisrael to a goy, and the Yisrael is selling it to. It's also for him to sell to that goy. By the goy to a goy, there's no isser of goy of Timothy selling it to Benson. There's no problem with that. But over here, it's Yankel selling it to Timothy, and Yankel is muzhar not to sell it to Timothy, and we're mechuyev, we're muzhar shelo yavo shum Yisrael l'dei takala al yadenu. That shouldn't we can't cause any takala for a yid to come through us. So the whole heter of lifnei doesn't apply because the first person you're selling it to he is going to be over a mikshol, and that we can't do. Now you could have understood Tosfos to mean that therefore it's really just one lifnei. Over there it's talking about lifnei di lifnei, and when he said lifnei di lifnei, if the first lifnei is you're not causing any mikshol, that would be the question, mathematical way to learn it. So there it's two lifneis because the first one's not, and that's okay. On shaking over here, it's one lifnei. It's just chad lifnei. It's not lifnei di lifnei. That's how you could have said it. Problem is that the lashon is not mashma by the way. And number two, a bigger raya is that the second teretz he says v'od the chad lifneihu shelo yechta Yisrael b'shayla v'schiros b'nisyuni. It's only one lifnei. So we see that the first teretz of Tosfos was not mitzad one lifnei. It was a whole different teretz. So then what is pshat in the first teretz? What does this really mean? So, what it seemed to me from the mitzad the lashon of Tosfos is that Tosfos is learning over here that it's not really a possible. It's not really a real mikshol, because even if the Jew sells it to a goy, so it's like a zehirus d'Rabbanan. It's not a real isser. It's not like he's being over an isser mamish. I mean, it's an isser d'Rabbanan, but it sounds like he's saying a lashon of that Shuv Yisrael Tekal Ayadenu sounds like an isser Messiah. So we spoke last time about the isser. Even when there's not lifnei iver, there's also an isser lifnei of b'Rabbanan of Messiah. So we saw that from the Tosfos in beginning of Shabbos and Daf Gimel, the Tosfos said over there that had a kasha that how could it be when the balabas stands inside with the object and he's allowed to stand there. He's not Mechal Shabbos and it's mutter for him to stand there if the other person on the outside reaches in and takes it out because he did the kira and the hanacha, so he did nothing, so it's mutter. So Tosfos asked, how can it be mutter? Even though it's not lifnei iver because the guy could have taken it anyway, but it's at least Messiah. Just so the rest asked over there. So Tosfos is making a kimta that the guy on the outside is really a goy, and it's his own object, so he's allowed to take it out of your house, and you're not Messiah any avera. But Betzim Tosfos holds over there before us that there's an isser of Messiah. So that would sound like what Tosfos is saying over here, that even though there might not be in other words, maybe taka really it is lifnei to lifnei. He seems to be holding in the first teretz, it is lifnei to lifnei. But even so, it's usher because you're Messiah to do an avera. So it's not lifnei iver, Betzim it's not, but it is a problem with Messiah. And then the second teretz is, no, it really is lifnei iver because it's only chad lifnei. And the heter of lifnei, the lifnei, which takes away lifnei iver, doesn't apply over here because it's only chad lifnei. That's a possible way to understand it. And we saw the shach that answered the Tosfos and Daf Vav didn't talk about the Messiah because Tosfos is talking about a mummer over there. And by mummer, there's no isser of Messiah. So then if we accept the shach's answer and we want to say what we're saying over here, that it's a problem of Messiah, then you'll have to say that even though we're talking about a chashid over here, you're selling it to a person who's chashid to sell weiter. So you have to be mechal between a chashid and a mummer. When he's a mummer, which means he mamish, we know he's over this avera all the time, then he's doing it b'mezid. So then by that, the shach held that there is no Messiah, and that's why Tosfos and Daf didn't mention it. Over here, he is mentioning it because even though the person is chashid, the chashid doesn't make him a mumar. So there's still an Isser Lifnei Iver or either Lifnei Iver, or at least an Isser Messiah by him. That's one possible way to explain the two teretz and mitosis. And the second teretz will hold no, it's only considered a one-step process over here, because since you're the first person, you'd be machshel him, it's not called Lifnei de Lifnei. That's one way to explain the two teretz and mitosis. I saw the Stipler, so it's a different shot, a very geschmacka thing, that there's a tosis in the end of the parak that is done, a very important shaila, that the Gemara over there is talking about enabling somebody to, it was actually sugi we learned in by Aris. Sugi we learned this by Aris, by Amir al-Akum, same sugya. And Tosa, as a side shot, the Gemara said over there, Gemara asked the Kasha that how could we mutter to enable him to work on Chol HaMoed? What about Lifnei Iver? Or why do you have to even come on to Chol HaMoed? You're over Lifnei Iver. So the Gemara answered, Chad of Od Kamar, Chad of Lifnei Iver of Od Mishni Shnikos Al Shmo. Okay, it's called Al Shmo. It's with Maris Ayin, and besides that, it's also Lifnei Iver. Chad of Od Kamar. So Tosfos over here points out, it's a machlokas, it's a tremendous machlokas shown in the Moed Katan, where the Melechas Kol HaMoed is Rabbanan and Deraisa. The Gemara has drushes, and the Rush learns that the drushes are Kipshutam, and Mamish, and sort of Rashi seems to learn as well. But Tosfos over there is Nitchak, because how could they all these Heterim and Kol HaMoed, Tzorach this, Tzorach that? It must be this Rabbanan. All the drushes, it's Smachta Be'alma. So whether Melechas Kol HaMoed is Asur, Deraisa Rabbanan is a huge machlokes Rishonim. So Tosfos over here goes with the Mahalach of Ben Tam that it's only Rabbanan, and from there, since it's Rabbanan, mainly he has a raya that Lifnei Iver is Asur b'Deraisa, even to machshel somebody in Nisr Rabbanan. Because Sof Kosof, the Michshel is a real Michshel, whether it's the Torah Asur it or something else Asur it, the Rabbanan Asur it, it's still a Michshel Midraisa. It's a Shalom Rishonim, but that's what Tosfos comes out over there. But it's a back and forth Tosfos. It wasn't so clear. You had to try to prove it, and there's, if you hold Melechas Kol HaMoed as Deraisa, then the raya falls off. Okay, so the Stipler wants to say, and over there it's the day over there that's going back and forth is Das Rabbeinu Elchanan. So he wants to say that the same Rabbeinu Elchanan over here might be holding that is telling us a chiddush that even though the michshel that you're causing the Jew over here to do by selling it to a goy, that itself is only an Isser Drabanan. To sell that goy, it's because as far whether he's going to use it for Avodah Zarah or not. So Midaraisa we say Talinan, going back to the beginning of the sugya. Midaraisa it's not really Lifnei Iver. So if you go like the Ritva learned and everything, which Pashas this, the way Stipler's learning Tosfos, it'll be like the Ritva, that there's not really a Lifnei Iver Deraisa on the Jew when he sells it to the goy, even when he's chashad, even if he does it wrongly, he's only over an Isser Rabbanan. So Tosfos is saying that Ma'ir b'Yisrael chashad anu muzhar b'shelo yavo shum Yisrael adei takala ayadenu. Even it's a kala d'Rabbanan. So it's machadish that there's a Lifnei Iver even by d'Rabbanan, and that'll be the first teretz of Tosfos. Second teretz of Tosfos is going to go even if you hold there is no Lifnei Iver by d'Rabbanan, still it's going to be also over here, and it's going to only be one. And from that perspective, it's only one Lifnei Iver, not trade. It's not Lifnei, because Tosfos diverts. It doesn't talk about the fact that you're selling it to a goy and you're chashad because the goy is chashad for Avodah Zarah, but rather he says the chad Lifnei Iver hu shelo yechta Yisrael b'shayla b'schiras l'nisyoni. He puts it back to that Yisrael. If you sell it to Yisrael chashad, maybe he's chashad also to turn around and lend it to a goy and not care about his animal working on Shabbos. He's diverting it back to that Isser. So if that Jew does that, then he's going to be over Nissa Deraisa of Shvisut Behemto. So inside that it's one Lifnei. It goes all back onto the Yid, nothing to do with the Goy and what he's doing to Avodah Zarah. So he's turning it back into Mamish Chad Lifnei. So the two Mahalchim and Tosfos are going to really be whether is or totally on whether or not you say lifnei ira by an Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay. We'll hold that here. And let's see what time it is. Yeah, okay. Yosef, we're still within the, we're still okay. Okay, so Mr. Shem will send out Marmakolos and hopefully give me a bracha. I'll find time to be able to do the business for everybody, pass them back.
Sure, Harvey, thank you.
Okay.